Good afternoon. This is West Texas Wind Program, blowing stuff your way today from Valentine, Texas in the Valentine Radio Studio. I'm your host, Richard Mark Glover. Today we have an interview with climate specialist Bruce Melton of Melton Engineering in Austin and host of the website climatediscovery.org. Bruce and I will discuss climate change momentarily, and by the way, he will be speaking on climate change at Sul Ross State next Saturday, April 14th. We also have Native News, Texas Environmental News, a look at history, a short reading from Oren Lyon's address to the United Nations in 1977, and a poem from Jay Davis. Once again, our West Texas Song of the Week is Sweethearts or Strangers by local singer-songwriter Anthony Ray Wright. And here's a little instrumental from the band Climate Change to kick off our West Texas Wind interview with Bruce coming up.
Our guest today on West Texas Wind Interview is Bruce Melton, a professional engineer, environmental researcher, filmmaker, author, and director of the Climate Change Now initiative in Austin, Texas. Founded in 2005, the initiative is the oldest independent climate science education organization in the world. He has published over 500 articles on the latest climate science, a book, 2 experimental music documentaries, and 36 songs. The initiative uses global warming psychology to create successful educational materials where previous education efforts have not worked out so well. Melton's work can be found on climatediscovery.org. Good morning, Bruce.
Good morning, Mark. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Our pleasure here. You'll be the first climatologist here interviewed on the West Texas Wind Program.
We're increasing, it's closer to 3 ppm per year now, and the carbon dioxide concentration has started increasing faster than the rate that we're putting carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And what this means is the feedbacks are basically kicking in. The feedbacks allow Earth to produce its own CO2 that adds to all of the carbon dioxide that we're emitting and all of it that's already in the air. So we're in trouble there because Earth is basically, right now as we speak, taking over being the driver of climate change. Mankind's emissions are no longer the main force causing climate change.
You mean that emissions from cars and refineries don't matter anymore?
It's not that they don't matter. It's that there's a larger force now that's acting to drive climate change. In the past, mankind's emissions have been a huge impact on the rate of warming. But now, because we've emitted so much carbon dioxide and we've warmed the atmosphere so much above the equilibrium where we were in the past, that now Earth itself is emitting carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases, like from melting permafrost is a great example. As the Arctic warms, we melt permafrost. Permafrost is just full of methane and carbon dioxide from partially decomposed organic material. Both are greenhouse gases, and all that stuff is now coming into the atmosphere where before it was stored in the deep freeze. Millennia, tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of years of greenhouse gases were stored in this permafrost, and now it's all oozing back out into the atmosphere. The oceans are doing the same thing. As oceans warm, they can't hold as much carbon dioxide. They start to emit instead of soaking up, or instead they're soaking up less.
Is it true that oceans over the last, throughout the industrial age, have been soaking up our CO2 from industrial pollution, and now they're saturated?
Well, they're not really saturated because the ocean currents move water along. Part of what maybe you're thinking about is that the upper oceans have become close to saturated. They've gotten a lot more carbon dioxide soaked into them over time. And what we're seeing is now we're finding more carbon dioxide in the lower levels of the ocean than we were seeing, say, 10 years ago. So what's happening is the ocean currents are moving some of that carbon dioxide that's been accumulating in the surface ocean down into the lower layers of the ocean. It's not so much that it's saturated, it's just now we're starting to put more carbon dioxide into the deeper ocean, whereas before it was mostly all going into the surface ocean. I want to get back to your 450 question. What's it going to be like? Extremes are increasing, and we've moved into the rapidly increasing phase of climate change over about the last 5 or 10 years. And so what this means is that we can expect likely that the extremes will continue to increase at a faster rate. So by the time we get to 450, which, about 3 parts per million per year is really not going to be that long. And it's likely that rate will continue to increase as we see more permafrost melting and more forests dying, because forests soak up carbon dioxide too. And as they die, they don't soak up any more carbon dioxide and they actually start to emit carbon dioxide. The Amazon, 3 times in the last 10 years, since 2005, 13 years, 3 times massive drought in the Amazon has caused the Amazon to flip from a carbon sink to a carbon source. And that means that these massive droughts killed so many trees in each of these massive droughts. 2005 was a greater than 100-year drought. 2010 was bigger than 2005. And then 2016, with our most recent El Nino that we just had, was bigger than 2010. So we've had these 3 massive droughts, and they've killed all these trees. Each time, for several years, the Amazon flips from a carbon sink to a carbon source. So that's another place where we're getting more carbon dioxide coming into the atmosphere that the Earth is putting there, that we're not putting there from our emissions. By the time we get to 450, we're going to see these extremes that we've been having increasing not a little bit more, but very likely a lot more.
When you say extremes, you're talking about something like Hurricane Harvey.
Hurricane, droughts, the flooding, rains that we've had. I've got a list. I looked at the Austin Airport, the Bergstrom Airport weather station, and evaluated the last 5 years of rainfall, the rainfall records from the Austin Bergstrom Airport, to see exactly how much these storms have been increasing in Austin. And what I found was that over the last 5 years, we've had 14 storms that were greater than the 1-year storm. And the 1-year storm is what we can expect to happen on average once a year. I found that 10 storms greater than the 2-year storm have happened in the last 5 years. 6 storms greater than the 5-year storm have happened in the last 5 years. 5 storms greater than the 10-year storm. 3 storms greater than the 25. 3 storms greater than the 50, and 1 storm greater than the 250-year storm have happened in the last 5 years.
So what is the cause then? Is it because the greenhouse gases have created this blanket over the Earth and we're just getting hotter and therefore more energy?
That's it. It's more than that, too. It's the greater amount of energy does a couple of things. Warmer air can hold about 7% more moisture, and moisture is like gasoline to a fire. Moisture to a thunderstorm is like gasoline to a fire. The more fuel you have, the bigger the storm is going to be. So theoretically increases about 7%. Very interestingly, though, Harvey, I just saw a piece of work on Harvey about how much more rainfall, the warming that we've seen, the warmer Gulf, the warmer atmosphere would have created with Harvey. And it should have been, since we're about a degree and a half warmer, it should have been, 7 to 10%. But it ended up being 37%, which puzzling scientists because they're not exactly sure how it's happening. And, that's part of the challenge with climate change. It's really complicated. But we know a lot of these theoretical things, and through observations, we can refine those, and then we can better understand the academics so that we can make better projections for the future. So that's one way that just the warmer air allows the atmosphere to hold more fuel, more moisture. The other way is that it changes the way the atmosphere responds, and that has a bearing on storms. One of the ways is that the Arctic warming faster than the rest of the world because the Arctic is losing so much ice, and ice reflects up to 90% of the sunlight back into space, whereas Earth and plants and water absorbs up to 90%. All this extra heat in the Arctic changes the way the jet stream works. It makes the big jet stream loops that, pull down cold fronts in the winter and create basic weather patterns. It makes those loops bigger so we can pull colder air down further, and it slows the westward to eastward progression of these things, which basically stalls weather systems. That westward to eastward progression of these big jet stream loops, that drives the cold fronts west to east. So greater warming in the Arctic makes these loops bigger, and it slows them down, which tends to stall weather systems. Harvey's stall was caused by one of these big, slow-moving loops in the jet stream. Most hurricanes, or a lot of hurricanes, stall, but they only stall for a day or two. Harvey's 5-day stall meant that instead of getting 20 to 30 inches of rain out of this hurricane, they got 55 inches.
5 days.
55 inches. And so that's just the way that on a warmer planet, or as we're warming, before we get back into equilibrium again.
And we want to remind listeners that Bruce Melton, climate specialist, will be speaking at the Sul Ross campus on April 14th on climatology, climate change. West Texas wind. Texas Environment News coming up next. Half of the country's oil rigs are drilling in the Permian Basin, and 1 out of every 6 barrels of oil equivalent produced in the USA originates there. The fracking boom activity is at its highest level ever. Exxon announced it would triple its production in the Permian by 2025, while Apache Corporation plans to drill 6,000 wells on its leased land near Balmorhea State Park over the next 10 years. Meantime, the demand for fracking water has doubled since last year, according to IH Market Limited. The consulting firm predicted Permian oil and gas extraction will require 97 billion barrels of water annually by 2020. That's equivalent to 82 years of water supply for the city of El Paso. TCEQ Chairman Brian Shaw told U.S. legislators last week in Washington that reducing ozone in the air would not be a health benefit. We've lowered the ozone standard close to the point that I'm convinced we're not getting much, if any, benefits health-wise from lowering the ozone standard, said Shaw. The federal government is considering lowering ozone particulate from 75 parts per billion to 70 parts per billion. Ozone is the substance of smog. Smog, according to the EPA, is an important health problem and has many negative effects, including premature death. Texas, according to the EPA, is the biggest smog producer in the country. Dallas-based Kelsey Warren's Sunoco Corporation has been on notice by the Public Utilities Commission in Pennsylvania. The billionaire's Mariner 2 gas pipeline under construction there is causing sinkholes in a residential area of Chester County. Many residents have been forced to relocate or stay in their houses surrounded by 15-foot sinkholes. Residents Russell and Mary March issued this statement. Sunoco still does not seem to know the extent of the destruction it caused 5 months after the sinkholes first appeared. This new investigation is long overdue, but to add insult to injury, the investigation may force the residents of Lisa Drive to have to relocate from their already damaged properties. We hope Sunoco will be forthcoming about the investigation's results. Last week, we reported on the Kermit Wink sink an area of West Texas that has sunk as much as 40 feet in the last 2.5 years due to oil exploration, according to a report by SMU geophysicists. Along the sink zone, 2 water wells in the Santa Rosa Aquifer used by the town of Kermit to supply water to residents were placed on the EPA's Superfund site last summer due to a plume of 2 carcinogenic chemicals, trichloroethene and tetrachloroethene. According to the Midland Reporter-Telegraph, 2 gas stations and 2 dry cleaners in Kermit use the chemicals, but have been cleared of being the source point for the toxins. A West Texas wind source said that both chemicals are commonly used as a solvent in fracking fluids. We spoke with John Shepard, Director of Public Works in Kermit.
This Wink-Kermit sink that was reported by the SMU geophysicists last week kind of brought this to mind again. Has the Superfund site found where that plume of those 2 chemicals, 2 toxic chemicals, have come from yet?
No, I hadn't found the source yet.
And the Midland Reporter-Telegraph reported that there was 2 gas stations and 2 dry cleaners that were in Kermit, but they were cleared of being the source. Is that your understanding as well?
Yes, sir. That's, so far as I know, yes, sir.
And if I recall, you told me that you all have 7 wells coming out of the Santa Rosa Aquifer, and that by blending 5 good wells with the 2 Superfund wells, that the overall water is healthy.
Yes, sir. Yeah, it meets standards. Yeah, it's really 9 wells.
Oh, it's 9 wells. So
yes.
Do they all come from the Santa Rosa Aquifer?
They're really calling it the aquifer just above that. I've always called it the Santa Rosa.
What do they call it? They call it the Pecos or the Drury or something like that.
Well, it's just above the Pecos Valley Aquifer.
How deep are your wells?
500 feet. They produce from 300 to 500.
Would you mind telling me how that blending process works?
It's just those wells that have the high levels they've got some iron and manganese in them anyway, so they're put on a back burner. So they're a last call well. You know, you have to have a real high demand before they even come on anyway. So even if they do come on, it blends with the good wells, and that just lowers the concentrations down to where they meet EPA standards.
And the 2 chemicals that they're trying to find the plume source are trichloroethane and tetrachloroethane. And as I understand, the Superfund is providing the money to do the investigation on where these chemicals might be sourced from.
Right. I hadn't heard from them in quite a while. They're supposed to come in and we look some more and see what we can do, some more testing, but I hadn't heard from them or anything. Of course, their boots on the ground is the Texas, it's TCQ. Texas is actually part of that. That's boots on the ground here for EPA.
Right. So I understand that TCQ is pretty much AWOL in West Texas. Do you think that the Kermit Wink sink is got anything to do with the contamination of those 2 wells?
No, not for us. That aquifer travels through our county, travels from northeast to southwest. All those holes are to the south of Kermit, to the southwest. So now maybe down the road, Wink might feel some impacts from it. No, I don't believe that would be the case. If that were the case, I think every well would be, not just a particular well.
All right, John. Well, I sure appreciate it.
All right, sir. You have a good one.
I can call you in a year and a half from now.
All right. you take care.
A private water developer was ultimately denied a permit to pump 46,000 acre-feet a year from the Carrizo-Wilcox Aquifer in central Texas. The presiding state judge, Carson Campbell, ruled on behalf of Simsboro Aquifer Water Defense Fund that the Lost Pines Groundwater Conservation District denied local landowners from participating in the permitting process. Judge Campbell's ruling sets an important precedent for all of Texas, said Michelle Gagnes, a Lee County attorney and director of Simsboro Aquifer Water Defense Fund. It means groundwater districts must recognize the property rights of all landowners in the groundwater and give them a voice on pumping permits that likely will affect the groundwater under their land. Summer Webb, Culberson County Groundwater Conservation District Manager, whose district recently approved a 6,000 acre-feet a year permit to Agua Grande LLC for oil field use, said, "I have not kept up with this particular case closely enough to speak on the matter." Canadian corporation Pebble Mine has downsized their plans to keep the permitting process alive for their plans to mine gold, copper, and molybdenum from underneath Bristol Bay ecosystem, Alaska's most prolific salmon fishery. Bristol Bay Native Corporation and the Alaska Native Regional Corporation continue to oppose the mine, stating that any economical feasible size would pose a risk to salmon runs. As reported last week on West Texas Wind, Pebble Mine's original plans were rejected by the federal government as likely posing a risk to the abundant natural resources that exist there. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers continues to host a number of public meetings in villages in the Bristol Bay region as part of an ongoing environmental impact study. Coming up next, Native News. A record 83 Native Americans are running for state legislatures across the country. 11 Native American candidates are running for the U.S. House and 1 U.S. Senate seat. And 2 Native women are running for governor. The state with the most Native American office seekers is Montana, followed by Oklahoma, Minnesota, and almost all of the western states except Texas. Arizona Governor Doug Ducey signed into law last week establishing June 2nd as Native American Day. Senator Jamasita Peshlakai, Democrat District 7, was the chief sponsor of the bill, according to the Navajo Times. American Indians and Alaska Natives comprise 1% of the U.S. population, but they represent 2% of victims of racially motivated hate crimes, according to the FBI. West Texas Wind caught up with an Oglala warrior last summer just after a recent incident.
Well, we've been talking about violence in America, and after Charlottesville, there's a lot of talk. And I'm here today with an Oglala warrior who's experienced white on red, if you might, violence 4 times in his life. Tell me, if you would, just 2 or 3 weeks ago, you were met by 3 Nazis with baseball bats. How'd that go down?
I was just walking back, and it was at nighttime, and all of a sudden, see these 2 trucks coming by. Kind of knew what was going on, and they came out with masks on and all that. And ding, ding, round 1. Ding, ding, round 2 and 3.
They hit you pretty good in the ribs. I know you're hurting today with a baseball bat, and you defended yourself.
Well, yeah, I think it's a must that I need to, because this ain't a battle that's going to be putting me behind in what I need to do for the next day.
You went to the hospital, and basically they told you to tread lightly. These fellows left after, I would say, some brilliant self-defense.
Yeah, I don't think they'll be it'll take them a while to get back on their feet. But hopefully they learned a lesson, and saying that we're not stopping for anything.
3-on-1 is pretty bad ratio. Now, this isn't your first time down that path. It's happened to you 3 times before, and 7 years ago they got to you with some other baseball bats.
Yeah, I had an unfair advantage on that one, though. If I wasn't actually drinking as much as I was, or not even drinking at all, I would have conquered that one. But sometimes you lose, sometimes you win. Never give up, always defend.
You barely walked away on that one, and of course today you've got some signs of what happened back then. It's happened to you 2 other times, and this has happened in the north part of the United States. What's out of balance here?
I think there's just something wrong in the atmosphere that's making us do this. I mean, with like Facebook and all the phones and all that, some of us are probably getting neck aches just by looking at the phone. I'm just kidding. But something is going around which is polluting everything, including our minds, to go out in a rage fight or just doing whatever. It's not just up in the north, it's all over. And we're trying to stop it by just holding down these camps around here, our homes, trying to live like how in the old ways, how Grandma and Grandpa have been. Get the tradition back and getting to have the kids learn more experience on what our ways are. Because we can't do this when we're all separated, but we can do it all together. We can unite in prayer and however we need to.
Well, thank you for those words, and thank you for being on the program today.
Yeah, it's been an honor.
Academic American Barbara Perry, estimates that only 10% of hate crimes against Native Americans are reported, citing historical and contemporary experience with the police and the perception they do not take Native American victimization seriously. And now a short reading from Oren Lyons, a faith-keeper of the Turtle Clan of the Seneca Nations, when he addressed the United Nations in 1977. Power is not manifested in the human being. True power is in the Creator. If we continue to destroy the source of our lives, then our children will suffer. I must warn you that the Creator made us all equal with one another, and not only human beings, but all life is equal. The equality of our life is what you must understand and the principles by which you must continue on behalf of the future of this world. Economics and technology may assist you, but they will also destroy you if you do not use the principles of equality. Profit and loss mean nothing to future generations. I do not see a delegation for the four-footed. I see no seat for the eagles. We forget and we consider ourselves superior, but we are, after all, a mere part of the creation. We must continue to understand where we are. We stand between the mountain and the ant, somewhere and there only as part and parcel of the creation. It is our responsibility, since we have been given the minds to take care of these things. The elements and the animals and the birds, they live in a state of grace. They are absolute. They can do no wrong. It is only we, the two-leggeds, that can do this. And when we do this to our brothers, to our own brothers, we do the worst in the eyes of the Creator. That was Oren Lyons in his address to the United Nations in 1977. He is with the Seneca Nation. And now a little look at history. We're going to go back 46 years. Chief Justice William O. Douglas gave his famous dissenting opinion that natural resources such as valleys, alpine meadows, rivers, lakes, estuaries, beaches, ridges, groves of trees, swampland, or even air ought to have standing in a court of law to sue for their protection. He wrote, "The critical question of standing would be simplified and also put neatly in focus if we fashioned a federal rule that allowed environmental issues to be litigated before federal agencies or federal courts in the name of the inanimate object about to be despoiled, defaced, or invaded by roads and bulldozers, and where injury is the supreme subject of public outrage." This was a dissenting opinion. The majority ruled against it 4-3 in the Supreme Court case of 1972, Sierra Club versus Morton. Although the USA still does not allow nature to have legal standing, several countries, including Ecuador and Bolivia, have adopted this theory into law. Corporations, since 1886, have standing equally with humans. And now the poem of the week, Waiting Patiently by Jay Davis. It takes God just a moment to clean up all the air, to water all the deserts, to vanquish all your care, but you are so depressed that you're sure you'll die young. But God thinks all your notions are a bunch of dung. 'Cause in a snap of fingers and a twinkling of the eye, God has turned it all around. On these things we don't lie. 'Cause God's a poet, and poets can dream with creativity, ingenuity. Hitch up your team. For to feed all hungry mouths, it is nothing, I do say, and to heal all diseases with humility. Let's pray and declare in one accord, we don't know what we're doing. That's Jay Davis' poem, Waiting Patiently. Well, thanks for listening to the West Texas Wind program. Hope you'll be with us next week. And we're going to go out with the song of the week once again, Sweethearts Are Strangers, a public domain song that began showing up on the records in the 1930s. Here it is, covered by Anthony Ray Wright, recorded at the Sunny Flats Studios.
Sweethearts are strangers, where do we go from here? Sweethearts are strangers, dear. Sweethearts are strangers, I'll make it up somehow. Sweethearts are strangers